Are you wondering about some of the best ways to save for your kids? Here's what I've done over the course of the last decade, including what I think I got right and maybe what I'd do differently if I had to start all over. Let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Eric Blattner with Kiddie Wealth Management, and thanks for watching. Before we get started, as always, I just want to thank folks for tuning in. And if you'd like to follow along with our thoughts on markets and investing and planning topics, the best way to do that is to go over to divvywealth.com, D-I-V-V-I wealth.com, and sign up for our blog. Or you can head over to YouTube and search at Divvy Wealth Management and subscribe to our channel there. So with that being said, I want to also mention that anything we talk about in these videos is not intended to be financial advice or anything in that nature. It's really for informational purposes, educational purposes, and if you can learn something from it, I think that's our goal. So with all that out of the way now, getting back to the original topic, are you saving for your kids, or are you thinking about saving for your kids and wondering what might be the best ways to go about it? You certainly have lots of options. And so I wanted to share some personal experiences around our children. So my wife and I have three kids that are between the ages of 6 and 11. And for us, saving for them has always been a priority. We were both very fortunate to walk off a college campus with a degree and no debt. And it was important from our perspective to kind of pay that forward with our kids. So we started saving at an early age, and we made some mistakes. I think that they were mistakes, or maybe some things that we might do differently along the way. So I wanted to share some of those experiences in case they might be helpful as you think about your individual circumstances. So with that, we'll just start with what we did. And our first child was born in 2012, and our plan was pretty simple. So the things that I think we got right are we started early. Anyone that has seen one of these compound interest tables understands the value of starting early. Compounding really has or offers the biggest benefits when the time horizons are long. So we started generally within the first 6 to 12 months after each of our children were born. So that was the first thing that I think we did right. The second thing is we made it regular contributions. We were consistent and we automated the process. So we never saw the money. We never spent the money. We saved for our kids right out of the gate each and every month. The amounts weren't big, but they were consistent. And over time, they added up. And then lastly, we paid attention to taxes, or at least we tried to pay attention to taxes. So we used accounts where we could defer taxes and potentially make tax-free withdrawals, like a 529 account. And in taxable accounts, we tried to use structures that could be, when I say tax efficient, I mean they give us the control over the timing of the tax liability. So ultimately, or at least as much control as we could reasonably expect to have. So those are some of the things that I think we got right. That was our plan. And we basically used 529 accounts, and we used custodial accounts in the names of the kids. So it was a pretty simple plan. We started early, we started small, we automated, and over the course of the last decade, it's worked pretty well. So I think those are some of the things that we got right. Now, what would we do differently if we had to start over? And I think there's four things in particular that I wanted to touch on. The first is we would ditch custodial accounts. We would not use a custodial account if we were starting over today, and really for two reasons. The first reason is that once you make a deposit into a custodial account in the name of the child, and when I say custodial account, these are things like UGMA, UTMA accounts. Those are the common acronyms. Once you make a deposit into those accounts, the money legally becomes the child's. And that can be good and bad. But I think from our perspective, if we had to do it all over again, we would prefer to have a little bit more control. And it's impossible to know exactly what those kids are going to look like or think like or behave like when they're 18, 19 years old. But essentially, as soon as they turn the age of majority, usually either 18 or 21 years old, that money is legally theirs. And so if you were saving for college and thinking that those dollars can be used to help fund college expenses, that may be the case. But if that 19-year-old or 21-year-old decides that they have other plans or other things in mind, there's really not much you can do legally to stop them from spending that money however they choose. So we would ditch the custodial accounts. We would continue to fund 529s to an extent. So I'm a big fan of the 529 accounts, and I won't go into a ton of detail, but essentially, for a lot of savers, you can get a state tax deduction for any of the contributions you make, and those dollars can grow. You invest those dollars typically in mutual funds. They grow tax deferred, and then if they're withdrawn to use for qualified education expenses, they can be withdrawn completely tax free. So it's a very, very efficient way to save for college expenses. There's a lot of great options out there for 529 accounts, whether it's direct to the plan where the individual goes and manages it on their own. There's advisor sold plans for folks that want a little bit of help, but there's really good options across the board, at least in my opinion. So we would continue to fund 529s. The big concern for a lot of parents over time has been, what if my kid doesn't go to college? Or what if they get scholarships and grants and things of that nature? And actually, before I go down that path, one more reason we would kind of go back to that custodial account, why we would avoid it. I was getting ready to mention they might get financial aid for the 529 plans. Custodial accounts, when you're applying for financial aid, one of the things that they're going to take into account are the assets, both the parents and the kids, the income of the parents and the kids. And the custodial accounts are considered assets of the children, and they're actually the most harmful in terms of qualifying for financial aid. So that's another reason that we would probably ditch the custodial account. While I'm on the topic, I'll also mention that my wife and I have this idea of wanting to be fair, quote unquote, fair with our children. So in our eyes, fair is basically the idea that once they become adults, whether that's 18 years old if they don't want to go to college, or 22, 23 years old when they're leaving a college campus, we'd like them all to basically start out life with no debt and with roughly a similar amount of dollars available to them to help buy a car, put a down payment on a house, something along those lines. Nothing crazy, but we like the idea of being fair. And once those custodial accounts have been funded and they grow, especially if your kids are spread out over the course of different years, those investments are going to perform pretty differently. And so, like, I'll use an example with my oldest. We started with him again in 2013, started funding it. It was the beginning of the bull market. And so now when we look at his account balance, he's not he's not rich by any stretch of the imagination, but we do get a little sick to our stomach when we see how much is in his custodial accounts versus the younger two kids, and thinking to ourselves, at some point we're going to have to level that up, or we will want to level that up for the younger two kids. So the custodial account has created kind of some of those potential headaches for us, and that's why we would probably opt to avoid those going forward. Now, going back to the 529 accounts, sorry for skipping around. So those dollars, what if your child decides they don't want to go to school, or they don't have qualified education expenses that would allow for those tax-free withdrawals? That's always been one of the bigger fears for parents in overfunding a 529. Well, the Secure Act 2.0, this was passed in December of 2022. It removes at least some of that fear. So basically, if there are dollars that are left inside of a 529 plan, there are some strings attached, but those children can essentially roll, or the beneficiaries of the 529 plans can roll a certain amount of assets from a 529 into a Roth IRA and avoid tax. Now, there's limits, there's strings attached, there's rules, so you want to be aware of all those things, but it does at least eliminate one of the concerns that parents may have had around 529 plans. So we would continue to fund 529s, and we still are big believers in the idea that those can be very efficient ways to support education expenses or future education expenses for your kids. The last thing I'll mention about 529s is that I think if we were in a situation where money would just flat out wasn't an object, we'd already been independently successful to the extent we had more than we ever expected to spend, and we were really interested in a legacy, specifically a legacy around education. we might really consider overfunding a 529 in a very big way. Most states will allow 529 assets or contributions of around $500,000, maybe more than that. And so why would you want to put $500,000 in a 529 account? One of the big reasons is estate planning. Those dollars are considered a completed gift, so it's out of your estate. But then secondarily, you can change beneficiaries on the 529 accounts. So if you have multiple children with multiple 529 accounts for each, they're listed as beneficiaries, and they don't use those assets, they can stay in the 529. They continue to grow. And then when you have grandkids, they can potentially use some of those 529 assets to support their education needs 30 years from now. So 40 years from now, whatever the timeline looks like. And it can be a pretty cool way to leave a legacy of supporting education. So that's just a side note, kind of something worth mentioning for those folks that might be in that situation. Granted, I assume that's not most of us, but to the extent that it is, it can be a pretty cool way to leave that legacy. So we would continue to fund 529s. We would ditch the custodial accounts. And then the third thing that we would do is we would fund a joint taxable brokerage account in my wife and my name, or my wife's and my name. And we would just earmark that account. We would know mentally that that account is really intended to support our kids. We can invest that money very tax efficiently in a way that allows us to grow and over the long periods of time. And it still gives us a lot of flexibility. It gives us options on how those dollars can be spent. The beautiful thing about a taxable brokerage account, I really like these accounts. I think they're probably underused by a lot of folks, but you have all the flexibility in the world to make withdrawals at any point in time. No penalties, no strings attached. You don't have to spend the money on specific things. It gives you a ton of flexibility to spend those dollars as you see fit. And for us, having that flexibility, having those options, it has a value. I don't know exactly what the dollar value is, but we're essentially trading by potentially taking some of those dollars that may have gone to a 529 account and instead moving them to a taxable brokerage account. We are eyes wide open making a trade-off for tax deferral and potential tax-free withdrawals for flexibility. And I think there's at least for our family, there is a value to that and a certain appeal to having options. So that's the third thing that we would do. And the fourth piece would be gifting. We would make gifting a bigger part of our plan. And I think when we talk about gifting, we're really thinking about it in the sense of gifting specifically to the children, and in the sense that we have a taxable brokerage account. Going back to the third thing that we would do differently, if some of those investments do really well, we say, what about the taxes when you sell? Well, with gifting, you might be able to lessen that tax burden, or you could potentially gift those securities to your kids. Now, the IRS has already figured out that parents might be wanting to avoid taxes by gifting to someone who's in a really low tax bracket. So there's something called the Kiddie tax that you need to be aware of and understand the implications there. But basically, children under the age of 18 or full-time students that are between the ages of 19 and I think 23 or 24, these Kiddie tax rules are going to apply. So they can still have roughly $2,300 in unearned income, like investment income, that would be taxed at their rate, and then anything beyond that would be taxed at the parent's rate. But I think gifting would be a bigger part of our plan. We like the idea of the flexibility that it might give us, the timing control that it might give us, and we feel like we could still grow assets in a pretty tax efficient way over the long run. So those are four things that we might consider differently. To recap, we would ditch the custodial accounts. We would still fund 529s, at least to a certain extent. We would use a taxable brokerage account, and we would really think hard about gifting strategies that could help support some of the goals that are important to us. So hopefully that helps. And if you have any questions, please reach out to the Divi Wealth team. We'd love to be a sounding board or any help that you might need. And as always, if you want to follow along, the best ways to do that are go over to diviwealth.com, DIVVI wealth.com, and sign up for our blog, or head over to YouTube and subscribe to our channel there. It's at Divi Wealth Management. So thanks again for watching, and have a great day.